Jasmine Matthews watched the all-white jury file back into courtroom, her tiny hand gripping Mr. Harrington's. Just 6 months ago, the same millionaire had called security on her, but now, against a system determined to separate them, he was fighting to adopt her. Before we explore this heartbreaking journey of a little girl yearning for family in a world that keeps denying her one, drop your location in the comments, hit like, and join our storytelling family by subscribing. Prepare yourself for an emotional roller coaster that will challenge everything you thought you knew about privilege, family, and what truly matters in a divided world. The glass doors of Harrington's Wonderland reflected the warm Georgia sun as 7-year-old Jasmine Matthews stepped inside. In Newton Heights, Atlanta's upscale toy district, she seemed out of place. Crystal chandeliers gleamed over expensive dollhouses, some costing more than 6 months of rent for Jasmine. Clad in a tattered yellow dress, her only outfit, and worn sneakers that left faint dirt marks on the marble floor, she drew wary glances and hushed warnings from affluent shoppers. Security guard Malcolm, crisp in uniform and stern in demeanor, sensed a disturbance. Owner Richard Harrington, $800 million. Widower was in the middle of showing a $5,000 robotic companion to prospective buyers when he noticed Jasmine, gently navigating without touching anything. Potential situation and collectibles, Malcolm said quietly into his earpiece, approaching Jasmine. This is a private store, young lady. Please leave. The floor fell silent as Jasmine walked past him with a quiet dignity far beyond her years. She approached Richard, clutching something tightly, and unfurled a crumpled, taped-together $20 bill. Holding it out with both hands, she said in a small, steady voice, "I want to buy a daddy. My mommy said this is enough money before she went to heaven." Her words left everyone stunned, even Richard annoyed at the interruption. His composure faltering, nearby shoppers whispered and scoffed, their reactions mixing disdain and sympathy in the hush that followed. Jasmine Matthews sat gripping Mr. Harrington's hand as the all-white jury returned. Just 6 months earlier, the millionaire had called security on her, but now he was fighting to adopt her, against a system determined to keep them apart. The afternoon sun gleamed through the glass doors of Harrington's Wonderland, a luxury toy store in Newton Heights. 7-year-old Jasmine Matthews, in a worn yellow dress and sneakers, stepped inside. Crystal chandeliers hovered above deluxe dollhouses worth more than 6 months of her family's rent. The shopping crowd fell silent. Some whispered, others recoiled. "Remove that child before she tries to steal," demanded a shopper. Malcolm, the stern security guard, moved forward to escort her out. Richard Harrington, a wealthy widower, was midway through pitching a $5,000 learning robot to clients when he saw Malcolm stop Jasmine. She calmly held up a crumpled $20 and said, "I want to buy a daddy. My mommy said this would be enough before she went to heaven." His composure faltered as whispers swirled around them. He noticed burned scars on her arms and cuts on her legs, and was struck by a haunting connection. His own daughter, Emma, would have been Jasmine's age if she hadn't died in the car crash that killed Emma and Richard's wife years ago. "Give us a moment, Malcolm," Richard said, surprising the guard and himself. He led Jasmine into his office, carefully watching her. She told him she lived with Grandma Lula in the yellow building, and sometimes stayed outside because she forgets who I am. When asked about her mother, Jasmine said softly, "The doctor said it was cancer, but no one could help anymore. She got real sick. Mommy said the $20 was for emergencies, but finding a daddy is an emergency. Grandma keeps forgetting to make food." Richard's fingers dialed Child Protective Services before he even processed her words. "I found an abandoned minor on my premises," he said professionally, requesting immediate intervention. 45 minutes later, social worker Diane Washington arrived, her tired eyes reflecting an overburdened system. At Richard's shock over the quick response, she said, "We have 300 cases, but only 7 social workers. Actually, that's more than most districts. Jasmine froze at Diane's badge and begged, "Please don't send me back. He hurts kids at night, and nobody believes us." Diane sighed. "We've had 3 abuse reports at our emergency home. No proof, but no options either." Her eyes met Richard's, silently challenging him to do better. Their meeting was interrupted by store manager Jeffrey Parker, who shoved security footage at Richard. "We told Malcolm to remove her immediately," he said with thinly veiled contempt. Reluctantly, Richard addressed the shoplifter and then returned to find the office empty, except for a battered stuffed rabbit on the chair, its ribbon bearing a handwritten note. "Please, find me a daddy." That note unsettled Richard deeply. Later, he lay awake researching foster care. He learned black children in Georgia spent 32% longer in foster care than white children. 0.40% of foster children in Georgia suffer abuse. Youth aging out have a 40% chance of homelessness, 60% chance of criminal conviction, and under a 3% chance of earning a college degree. The crumpled $20 lay on his nightstand, accusing him silently of returning to privilege while Jasmine remained lost in a failing system. Young men across the street eyed Richard's car as he parked, their glances sending his heart racing. When he returned 20 minutes later, empty-handed, his side mirror was smashed, and a crude white money scratch scrawled across the door a clear message. For the first time in his life, wealth and status offered no protection. A deep voice spoke behind him. "You lost, mister." Richard turned. A tall black man with graying temples, wearing a community center shirt, faced him. "I'm looking for a little girl named Jasmine Matthews," Richard explained, showing the stuffed rabbit. "She came to my store yesterday. I'm worried." The man, Marcus Jenkins, paused. So a rich white guy from Newton Heights suddenly cares about a kid from the projects. Then he added, "We've had 23 kids removed from families here this year. Not once did anyone from your part of town come looking." Richard paused. "Honestly, I don't know why. I just couldn't go back to life without trying." Marcus sighed, then offered help, warning him that distrust in these neighborhoods ran deep. Last month, a 10-year-old was handcuffed for playing with a toy gun while, in Newton Heights, they have shooting parties. They found the yellow apartment building. Inside, the hallway was filthy, wiring exposed, mold mingling with harsh cleaning chemicals, roaches roaming, and a broken elevator forcing residents to climb 8 flights. They located Grandma Lula, rocking by the window and whispering prayers. She snapped to clarity briefly. "They take all our children," then fell silent. Richard realized Jasmine had never been taken by CPS. She'd run away after being frightened at the agency. Alone, at 7, she'd been lost in a frightening, neglected system. Without hesitation, he withdrew $5,000 in cash to help fund search parties, despite warnings from Marcus about flashing money. Meanwhile, his phone buzzed with investor threats over a $20 million deal, but Richard silenced it. This was far more important. Later, a teenager reported seeing a girl matching Jasmine's description being led into the abandoned Riverside factory, a known drug hangout. Marcus warned, "It's dangerous, especially for a rich white guy." But Richard replied sharply, "I can't wait while she might be in danger." Comment 1 if you think Richard is right to risk himself for Jasmine, or 2 if you think he should let the professionals handle it. Like and subscribe to follow the next chapter. Can privilege save him, or will it put him in greater danger? The abandoned factory loomed, broken windows and graffiti marking decay. Sirens echoed in the distance as Richard and Marcus approached a chain-link fence. "This is your last chance," Marcus warned. "Those gang tags aren't decorations, they're territorial warnings." Richard's heart pounded, but the image of Jasmine frightened and alone overrode his fear. He squeezed through a gap with Marcus. Inside, the factory's stench hit them: urine, chemicals, rats scampering, shadows that seemed alive. They'd barely gone 50 feet when 5 young men stepped from the darkness. They eyed Richard's flashy watch, surrounding him with practiced menace. At dawn, Richard parked his Audi in Riverside District. Lush lawns and boutique cafes soon gave way to check-cashing outlets and barred windows. His expensive car and fair skin felt conspicuous and unwelcome. In a place where privilege made him a target, a deep voice rang out. "Lost your country club, white boy." A tall black man introduced himself as Marcus Jenkins. When Richard explained, he was looking for Jasmine Matthews and showed the stuffed rabbit. Marcus recalled that 23 children had vanished from this neighborhood. No one would come looking, until now. They located the yellow apartment block. Rita, Jasmine's grandmother, murmured with vacant eyes, "They take all our children," revealing that Jasmine had fled the system and was alone in a harsh environment. Alarmed, Richard withdrew $5,000 to fund search efforts, ignoring calls about a major $20 million deal. He was committed. Later, a teenager reported seeing Jasmine being led into the abandoned Riverside factory. Despite Marcus's warning, "A rich white guy here is asking for trouble," Richard insisted on going. "I can't just wait." At the factory, 5 men cornered them. Deason, the leader, recognized Jasmine's name and demanded, "What's she worth to you?" Knife at Richard's stomach. They took $5,000 for information. Guided deeper by Deason, they discovered Jasmine in the East Wing, sorting drugs under Hector's command. Richard rushed forward but was knocked unconscious by a brutal blow. Jasmine tried to run but was slapped. Fueled by anger, Richard powered to his feet. Just then, police burst and officers quickly pinned Marcus, assuming he was the threat, while treating Richard as the victim. "He's with me," Richard cried, blood streaming. After the misunderstanding cleared, Jasmine was taken to Atlanta Memorial Hospital, where she was diagnosed with severe malnourishment and abuse-related injuries. Failures of a system meant to protect her. Amidst the clinical setting, someone whispered, "Urban kids sometimes fake it." The words stung. Jasmine clutched Richard's sleeve, terrified. "Please don't leave me again. Bad people come when grown-ups leave," he promised. "I'm not going anywhere." When social worker Diane Washington arrived, she warned that fostering a black child by a white man would be fraught, questioned for motives, culture, and commitment. But Richard immediately applied for emergency placement, whatever it takes. Back in Newton Heights, Richard transformed his penthouse, removing fragile art, baby-proofing crystal cabinets, preparing a safe haven. Yet anxiety crept in. Investor calls co-workers questioning his sanity. Board members worried about the fallout. Then came a call from Bernard Kinsler, lead shareholder. "Taking in a child from the projects could derail our brand's image." Richard responded firmly, "She's a child in danger, not a PR liability. If our values can't accommodate human decency, maybe we should rethink our model." A stunned pause followed, until Bernard finally warned, "Shareholder meeting in 2 weeks. We strongly recommend reconsideration." At sunrise, Richard pulled into Riverside District in his sleek Audi. Behind him, young men eyed the car. He returned 20 minutes later to find the side mirror smashed and white money scratched across the door. Wealth meant nothing here. If anything, it painted a target on his back. A tall black man in a community center shirt stepped forward. "Lost your country club, white boy?" he asked. Richard explained he was searching for Jasmine Matthews, offering the stuffed rabbit as proof. The man, Marcus Jenkins, held up a hand. "A rich white guy finally shows up for a kid from the projects," he said. 23 kids taken this year. No one's come looking until now." Richard admitted he didn't know why he'd come, only that he couldn't go back to normal knowing Jasmine was out there. They located the yellow apartment building. Inside, corruption, peeling wiring, mold, roaches, broken elevator made Richard's penthouse feel hollow by comparison. They found Grandma Lula, rocking and murmuring, They take all our children. Shocked, Richard realized Jasmine hadn't been taken. She'd run, terrified and alone. Without hesitation, he pulled $5,000 cash to fund search efforts, ignoring investor calls and concerns about a major deal. This was more important. At an abandoned riverside factory, a tip led them inside. 5 men cornered them. Deason, the leader, recognized Jasmine's name, skirting with the knife and demanding, "What's she worth to you?" Knife pressed to Richard's ribs, Marcus cited the risks. Deason admitted he'd seen Jasmine inside. Taken by Hector, they went deeper, found Jasmine and other kids forced to sort drugs under Hector's watch. Richard rushed forward, but was struck unconscious, awakening to the sound of his own pain. Marcus was knocked aside. Jasmine tried to flee, only to be slapped down. Then police burst in. They pinned Marcus, despite him being a victim. "He's with me," Richard cried, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. Officers treated Richard as a victim. Marcus was handcuffed at the hospital. Jasmine was examined. Severe malnourishment, dehydration, old and new injuries. A nurse whispered that urban kids sometimes exaggerated injuries. Jasmine overheard. When visiting hours ended, she clung to Richard. "Please don't leave me again. Bad people always come back when grown-ups leave." He vowed to stay. Social worker Diane Washington arrived. The system isn't built for a white man fostering a black child. Expects questions about motives, culture, and commitment. Richard responded with determination. "I want to apply for emergency placement tonight, whatever it takes." Back home, Richard child-proofed his penthouse, the elegant, minimalist space, now sterile, unwelcoming. Anxiety crept in as bored. Members, friends, and investors rang with doubts. Bernard, lead shareholder, boomed, "Our brand can't risk this. You need to reconsider." Richard replied sharply, "She's a child in danger, not a PR case. If that's a problem, maybe. We need a different model." Suddenly, he received news that a conservative retail partner was canceling an 8-figure renewal, citing brand values, and leaked news of his foster application. Fear gripped him like never before. Business failure felt real, again not abstract, but possible. That afternoon, Jasmine arrived from the hospital, clutching her rabbit and a bag of her few belongings. She viewed his penthouse warily, as though expecting this miracle to be temporary. "Is this all yours?" she asked. He nodded, unsobered, as he saw his home through her eyes. Beautiful, cold, and empty. That night, her nightmares revealed deep wounds. She flinched at sudden movement. She'd never seen water deep enough to bathe in. She stashed dinner rolls under her mattress. At breakfast, he found her avoiding food. Her trauma became his reality. The next morning, the building manager stopped by. Complaints about Jasmine's distress and security concerns already filed. He suggested consider housing her elsewhere until the adoption is final. Richard's quiet, fierce response: "If anyone here has concerns about my family, direct them to my attorneys." The word family slipped out and felt right. Helping Jasmine read that evening exposed massive gaps in her learning, despite her obvious intellect. Suddenly she asked, "Are you in trouble because of me?" Richard struggled to explain prejudice without causing more harm. Jasmine responded, "Mama said some people's hearts are too small to hold everybody. They decide who to care about and who to push away." Their conversation deepened. She asked about the photo on his desk. He shared about his daughter Emma and wife Susan. For the first time in years, she told him about her mother Letitia's fight with cancer, discrimination, and heartbreak while trying to keep her safe. Just then, the doorbell rang. His parents, Elaine and Jeffrey Sr., appeared fresh from the airport and icy with disapproval. They called Jasmine a problem and warned Richard about reputation and family name. That stirred a protective resolve in Richard, a choice between old values or new truths. The next day, at their first foster placement hearing in Jefferson County Family Court, Judge Eleanor Whitfield's skeptical gaze and questions about why this black child tried him. The prosecutor highlighted Richard's past political donations and statements. Advocates spoke passionately about cultural kidnapping, but Richard knew his answer. He wasn't doing this for image or redemption. Jasmine needed a guardian who would truly see and protect her, whatever it took. Reverend James Wilson, speaking with quiet intensity, reminded the courtroom that transracial adoption doesn't only separate children from their families, it severs them from their cultural roots, inherited resilience, and the community knowledge essential to navigating a racially stratified society. His words struck Richard with more impact than he expected, making the legal rebuttals prepared by his attorneys sound hollow and self-serving by comparison. When Jasmine was finally called to speak about her preferences, the formal set, its robed officials and cold formality, triggered a severe panic attack. She curled up, clutching her stuffed rabbit, gasping for air. Her trauma spoke louder than any words could. Dr. Marianne Phillips, the court-appointed psychologist, gave what turned out to be the most damaging testimony. While she acknowledged that Richard's intentions seemed sincere, she argued that his deep-rooted naivety about racial identity, development, and the isolation afforded by his privilege made him ill-equipped to support the healthy psychological development of a black child. She recommended against permanent placement, even while admitting that more culturally appropriate alternatives in the foster system were, tragically, scarce. Judge Eleanor Whitfield delivered a carefully balanced ruling. Richard was granted temporary custody for 90 days, contingent upon several stringent conditions. These included mandatory cultural competency training, frequent home visits, and most significantly a requirement that he relocate from his exclusive high-rise penthouse to a more culturally diverse neighborhood better suited to Jasmine's social integration. Additionally, the court would continue to search for any blood relatives who might have a legal claim to permanent placement. Although technically a win, the decision left Richard emotionally drained. Outside the courthouse, a swarm of reporters greeted them. Journalists shouted questions about his heroic act, a narrative that made him increasingly uncomfortable, reinforcing the exact white savior frame he was trying to avoid. The real cost of his decision became apparent the next morning. Richard received a formal notice from Harrington Enterprises' board of directors, requesting his temporary resignation as CEO, citing concerns that his personal affairs could negatively affect company interests. It was a calculated move, orchestrated by Bernard, and timed deliberately after markets closed. Charlotte, his assistant, delivered the news in person. Her usually composed demeanor cracked slightly as she added, "For what it's worth, I think what you're doing matters, and I'd like to keep working with you, however I can." The media coverage of Richard's decision evolved predictably. Initial praise soon gave way to deeper scrutiny. Pundits questioned his motivations and qualifications, and broader debates erupted over whether wealthy white individuals should rescue children of color instead of fighting to strengthen vulnerable communities. Within weeks, Richard found himself criticized from all sides by conservative allies for abandoning his career, and by progressive activists for perpetuating problematic savior dynamics. Jasmine's individual needs were increasingly overshadowed by the symbolic weight her case carried. Selling the penthouse and relocating to Meadowbrook, a diverse, middle-class neighborhood with good public schools, revealed another layer of racial reality. Realtors suddenly remembered listings were no longer available after he mentioned his black foster daughter. Mortgage officers requested extra documentation, despite his financial standing. During house tours, neighbors' facial expressions subtly changed when Jasmine appeared beside him. On their very first night in the modest colonial home, Richard bought outright to avoid financing complications. 2 police officers knocked on the door. A neighbor had reported a suspected break-in triggered by the sight of a black child entering a white-owned house. The officers' tone shifted immediately when they recognized Richard's name and status. but the emotional impact lingered. Relief mingled with a deeper realization. Had Richard not been who he was, things could have ended very differently. Later that week, Richard attended his first meeting of the Black Parents Association at Jasmine's new school. As the only white person in the room, he was met with cautious silence. After an awkward pause, Kesha Williams, the association president, asked pointedly, "Are you here because you genuinely want to understand how to support your black daughter's identity, or just to ease your conscience by performing inclusion?" The question pierced any illusion Richard had about easy answers. He was forced to reckon with how much he still didn't understand about the world Jasmine had to navigate, regardless of his wealth or protection. If you were in Richard's position, would you have the courage to challenge a system, seemingly built to keep you and the child you love apart? Or would you retreat to the safety of your old life? Comment 1 if you believe the system is right to question Richard's cultural readiness to raise Jasmine. Comment 2 if you think love, an unwavering commitment, should be the deciding factor. If you're invested in Richard and Jasmine's story, follow along to see what happens next. When a man of privilege must walk paths the system never meant for him to walk, and learns just how broken those systems are. Westview Elementary School, Jasmine's new academic home, was a world apart from the elite private institutions Richard had once considered for Emma. Its rusting playground, crowded classrooms, and prison-like security measures stood in stark contrast to the vibrancy of student artwork and the warm greetings from teachers who knew each child by name. Enrolling Jasmine quickly exposed Richard to the educational disparities he'd previously seen only in data. Her assessments revealed that she was functioning nearly 2 grade levels behind, a result of inconsistent schooling while caring for her ill mother and surviving bouts of homelessness. During their first parent-teacher conference, Mrs. Denise Jackson, a veteran educator with 26 years of experience, didn't mince words. "I've seen well-meaning white foster parents come and go, Mr. Harrington. Jasmine needs more than good intentions. She needs consistency, permanence, adults who show up even when it's hard." Richard responded with quiet honesty, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm here to learn, and I'm not going anywhere." Mrs. Jackson seemed to soften, outlining a path forward, a combination of academic support and emotional healing. "She tests you," she warned, "because everyone else has failed. Passing that test is your only job." That evening, at a school parent meeting, Richard once again found himself the only white adult in the room. The atmosphere was polite, but guarded. He was clearly an outsider. When his turn came to introduce himself, he chose raw honesty over practiced polish. "I'm Richard Harrington, Jasmine's foster father. I don't have the answers, but I know she deserves better than what the system gave her. I'm here to learn how to give her that." His candor thawed some skepticism, but tension remained, especially when the conversation shifted to resource allocation. The group discussed how predominantly white schools across town received nearly $3,400 more per student each year. Richard's outrage clashed with their weary familiarity. They'd been fighting this fight for years with no cameras or headlines. That difference became starkly clear at the school board meeting, when Richard spoke, essentially echoing what black parents had long been saying. He received immediate press coverage and school administration response. Afterward, Kesha confronted him over coffee. "You realize how infuriating it is, right?" she asked. "That we say the same things for years and nothing changes. But a rich white man repeats it once, and suddenly it's urgent." Her words hit hard. Richard didn't argue. He understood and wrestled with how to use his platform without centering himself or reinforcing the very dynamics he was trying to challenge. Jasmine's academic progress was slow. Richard hired Tanisha Coleman, a skilled black educator, for after-school tutoring. Still, trauma's effects lingered. Learning remained inconsistent, and emotional healing advanced in fits and starts. Their most profound breakthrough came unexpectedly. One stormy evening, Richard found Jasmine hiding in her closet, trembling. She whispered, "When it storms, I remember all the times we had no place to go. I thought the sky was mad at me." Richard knelt beside her and simply said, "You're safe now. I promise, I'm not going anywhere." ChatGPT said. Through tears, Jasmine explained that storms meant leaking roofs, no electricity, and sometimes flooding in her previous homes. Bad things always happened during storms. Without hesitation, Richard crawled into the cramped space beside her and, for the first time, shared his own fear of driving in the rain, a trauma rooted in the accident that took his wife and daughter. This moment of mutual vulnerability bridged the distance between them, two wounded souls sitting shoulder to shoulder in the dark, finding unexpected connection through shared fragility rather than strength. As their new life gradually found a rhythm, Richard received an unexpected call from Frederick Whitman, his former VP of Operations, offering an enticing way back to his previous life, a startup opportunity backed by investors who would overlook the negative publicity on the condition that Richard stepped away from the adoption process and returned to the business world where he belonged. The offer came at a time when legal fees were piling up due to the custody battle. Jasmine's educational needs required costly specialized services not covered by insurance, and Richard's financial reserves were shrinking faster than anticipated, despite the real temptation. Watching Jasmine proudly hang her first B-plus spelling test on the refrigerator made Richard's decision clear. He chose family over career. Though the practical challenges ahead were daunting, Richard's required cultural competency training, initially seen as a box to check, turned out to be transformative. Led by Dr. Ayanna Johnson, a child psychologist specializing in transracial adoption, the course dismantled Richard's remaining colorblind beliefs through lessons on history, unconscious bias tests, and candid feedback about he had never noticed in his own language and assumptions. Dr. Johnson explained, "The goal isn't to make you feel guilty for privileges you didn't choose. It's to ensure you don't raise a child who internalizes society's negative messages about her worth, because the person who loves her most wasn't prepared to help her navigate racial realities." The looming final home study, which would decide permanent placement, felt like a life-altering exam. Richard and Jasmine both prepared anxiously, Jasmine by meticulously cleaning her room and practicing good behavior, Richard by obsessively reviewing legal criteria and developmental guidelines, both acutely aware that their fragile new family depended on external approval. Then, just 2 days before the evaluation, Richard's attorney called with devastating news. A previously unknown relative of Jasmine's mother had filed for custody, claiming Richard had removed Jasmine from her cultural community and demanding an immediate review that could restart the entire legal process. Stability suddenly seemed far away again. At the Fulton County Courthouse, the imposing building cast a heavy shadow as Richard guided Jasmine up the granite steps for an emergency. Hearing Jasmine gripped his hand tightly, a child wary of abrupt separations and struggling to trust permanence. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom, Walter Matthews sat confidently beside his attorney, dressed in a pressed shirt and new suit designed to project stability, stark contrast to the troubled background Richard's investigators had uncovered, including multiple domestic violence incidents and a patchy employment history involving cash businesses with little documentation. Judge Patricia Collins, newly assigned after Judge Whitfield recused herself due to a conflict of interest, examined the rushed case files with a neutral expression. Walter's lawyer portrayed him as Jasmine's maternal uncle, recently made aware of the child's situation after working out of state, now fully committed to providing the family connection and cultural continuity Jasmine deserved as her only living blood relative. The unspoken message was clear. Blood ties and racial matching should outweigh the stability and bond. Jasmine had developed with Richard even if it went against the child's best interests or preferences. Richard's attorney, Rebecca Chim, methodically countered with evidence exposing Walter's suspicious timing, his absence during Jasmine's mother's illness and funeral, and documents proving that social services had contacted Walter early on, but he had declined involvement, saying he wasn't ready to care for a child. Despite these red flags, Judge Collins appeared inclined to prioritize family preservation and cultural continuity, especially when Walter's lawyer argued that Richard was fundamentally ill-prepared to help a black child navigate racism, and removing Jasmine from her natural community amounted to cultural harm, regardless of material advantages. The courtroom atmosphere shifted when Walter asserted confidently that Jasmine would be better off with her own people, yet failed to correctly identify her favorite school subject, allergies, or the name of her beloved stuffed rabbit, basic knowledge that should have been obvious if there had been a real family connection. Richard watched in growing alarm as Judge Collins seemed willing to overlook these inconsistencies, focusing her questions on Richard's cultural limitations rather than Walter's lack of demonstrated concern. When Jasmine was called to speak privately with the judge, her trembling intensified, prompting Dr. Morris, the court psychologist, to question whether the testimony should proceed. But Jasmine straightened her shoulders and whispered to Richard, "I'll tell the truth. Mama always said, truth matters, even when people don't want to hear it." The 30 minutes in chambers felt endless to Richard, each moment stretching with the possibility of loss. He struggled with the injustice of Jasmine being forced once again to justify her needs to powerful adults deciding her fate. After the session, Judge Collins's tone shifted subtly but noticeably. Her questions of Walter grew sharper, especially about his knowledge of Jasmine's trauma and special educational needs. The judge's pointed inquiry, "Mr. Matthews, if family connection is so important, why did you tell the social worker that someone else could care for Letitia's child when first contacted after your sister's death?" was a critical moment. The turning point came when Dr. Morris revealed that Jasmine had become physically ill while discussing placement with Walter, eventually tearfully recalling memories of him from rare visits marked by frightening fights and her mother's crying. Jasmine disclosed that Walter had once hurt her mother's arm so badly it made a snapping sound, testimony that directly contradicted Walter's sworn statements and raised serious doubts about his motives. Seizing this opportunity, Rebecca presented financial records showing Walter's recent unemployment and eviction, alongside new debts for luxury purchases made after Richard's adoption story became public, building a compelling case that Walter's pursuit of custody was financially motivated rather than out of genuine concern. The judge's ruling offered temporary relief, supervised visitation for Walter, while investigations continued, with primary placement remaining with Richard until a final decision. But the ordeal left Richard deeply distrustful of a system willing to risk Jasmine's well-being to uphold ideological commitments to blood ties, even when evidence contradicted the child's best interests. Outside the courthouse, a media frenzy had erupted, with competing narratives taking shape. Conservative outlets framed the case as government overreach into private family matters, while progressive commentators debated the complex intersections of race, family, and systemic inequality exposed by the fight, despite court-appointed supervision. During Walter's visits, Jasmine became increasingly withdrawn and physically ill, sometimes developing unexplained fever signs Richard recognized as her body's response to overwhelming stress. During the fourth supervised visit, when the monitor briefly stepped away, Walter allegedly whispered threats to Jasmine about what would happen if he finally got her away from the white man, though impossible to prove without witnesses. Jasmine's subsequent catatonic stat rigid with terror, and unresponsive except to direct physical prompts for hours, spoke volumes. The breaking point came with a medical evaluation after this incident. Dr. Eliza Thompson, the child psychiatrist, working with Jasmine, diagnosed symptoms consistent with acute stress disorder and urgently recommended suspending visitation, warning that forcing contact under such trauma could cause lasting psychological damage. However, Judge Collins ruled that visits continue, influenced by Walter's attorney's claims that Jasmine's distress was coached or exaggerated to block family reunification. In response, Richard made a dramatic choice that transformed the case from a private matter into a public cause. Celebre, he defied the court order by withdrawing Jasmine from school and moving to an undisclosed location, actions that legally made him a fugitive, accused of kidnapping. An arrest warrant was issued 48 hours later, charging him with custodial interference, possible felony kidnapping, and contempt of court offenses that could result in prison and permanent separation from Jasmine, regardless of the ultimate custody ruling. He was forced to choose between her immediate safety and their long-term future. From a small cabin in rural Georgia where Marcus Jenkins had helped them find temporary refuge, Shardred watched news coverage of the manhunt with surreal detachment. The legal system he once navigated with ease now branded him a dangerous criminal, while he simultaneously gathered extensive digital evidence documenting Walter's troubling behavior, inconsistencies in his statements, and Jasmine's declining health during visitation. That night, as Jasmine finally slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, beside her stuffed rabbit in the cabin's small second bedroom, Richard made a painful but decisive decision. They would voluntarily return to face legal consequences, but only after ensuring that the evidence against Walter was too strong and public to be ignored. He dedicated his remaining resources to exposing the fundamental flaws in a family court system that routinely placed ideological ideals above the actual well-being and safety of children. The courtroom was packed and fell silent as Richard and Jasmine entered through a side door, their matching blue outfits and joined hands symbolizing their unity in the face of a legal battle threatening to tear them apart. Television cameras captured every moment for a national audience deeply invested in their story. Rather than appearing defeated after his time in county detention, Richard radiated calm determination, nodding respectfully to Judge Collins before sitting beside his attorney Rebecca Chim. Their legal team had expanded to include Benjamin Marshall, a prominent civil rights lawyer known for using strategic litigation to challenge systemic inequities. The atmosphere shifted when Rebecca opened the case not by defending Richard's court violation, but with a detailed presentation titled Statistical Patterns of Bias in Family Court Placements. Her meticulously gathered data revealed alarming racial disparities. White foster parents were granted permanent custody over family objections 3 times more often than black foster parents in similar cases. Meanwhile, black biological relatives faced stricter scrutiny over minor criminal history and financial stability compared to white relatives seeking custody. Marshall then called expert witness Dr. Vanessa Richardson, a renowned researcher in child welfare outcomes. She systematically dismantled the court's assumption that blood relation automatically benefits children, citing unequivocal research showing that stability and attachment predict positive outcomes far better, especially for children with trauma histories. The developmental harm caused by disrupting secure attachments to uphold ideological commitments to biological ties is well documented but frequently ignored in family court decisions. Judge Collins' increasingly troubled expression reflected the impact of the presentation, as Richard's team highlighted how Walter Matthews had received preferential treatment, despite serious red flags that would have disqualified him had the racial dynamics been reversed. Walter's history of domestic violence was minimized as past mistakes, his financial instability framed as temporary setbacks, and most critically Jasmine's expressed preferences and documented trauma responses were dismissed as manipulated rather than legitimate. By making the case both about Jasmine's individual situation and systemic family court failures, The legal team attracted unprecedented public scrutiny. Civil rights groups, child welfare reform advocates, and legal ethics committees filed amicus briefs challenging procedural irregularities that favored theoretical racial matching over a child's demonstrated needs and attachments. Walter Matthews' confident demeanor from previous hearings crumbled under rigorous cross-examination. Contradictions in his testimony emerged about his relationship with Jasmine's mother. His whereabouts during periods he claimed to be working out of state, and notably, damaging recordings from jail, further undermined his credibility. Phone calls were revealed in which Walter discussed with associates how getting the kid would solve my money problems. When the rich guy pays to make me go away. The courtroom fell silent as Jasmine, now 8 years old, and dressed in a carefully chosen purple dress that made her feel brave like a queen, according to her morning affirmation, took the witness stand, after extensive preparation with child trauma specialists to ensure the process would not cause her further harm. Jasmine spoke in a quiet but steady voice, occasionally prompting the stenographer to ask her to repeat. Her testimony cut through the legal complexities with the clear simplicity of a child's perspective. My first mommy loved me, but she got sick and died. Then a lot of people were supposed to take care of me, but they didn't, or they hurt me. Then Mr. Richard found me, and he promised he wouldn't leave, even when it's hard. And he keeps his promises, even when the police came. I know what family means. It's the people who stay, when staying is hard. The racial tensions that had dominated earlier proceedings faded in the face of this fundamental question, expressed through a child's understanding, who had truly shown commitment to her well-being through actions, not just words. As the final arguments concluded, and Judge Collins announced she would deliver her ruling after a brief recess, Richard took the unusual step of asking permission to address the court directly, not about his case, but about the systemic issues it had uncovered. With the judge's permission, Richard spoke not with the polished confidence of his former life, but with the hard-earned wisdom gained through his journey. I came into this process believing, like many privileged white Americans, that the system might be imperfect but was fundamentally fair if you had the resources to navigate it properly. What I've learned through loving Jasmine is that the system isn't just broken for those without resources, it's broken by design, built on assumptions and biases that harm children while claiming to protect them. Whatever Your Honor decides about our case, I am committing my remaining resources and influence to ensuring other children don't face false choices between cultural connection and stability, between blood relationships and demonstrated love, as this process has forced upon Jasmine. After what Richard described as the longest 90 minutes of his life, Judge Collins delivered her ruling. She granted Richard permanent custody, with provisions to support cultural continuity and identity development. Unprecedentedly, she also recommended legislative review of family court procedures that had allowed Walter's fraudulent claims to proceed despite overwhelming evidence against him. The year that followed this courtroom victory was transformative. Richard devoted his remaining financial resources to founding the Matthews-Harrington Family Justice Initiative, which focused on family court reform and support for foster youth aging out of the system. Their home in a truly integrated community became a gathering place for chosen family, one that transcended racial lines while honoring Jasmine's cultural heritage. Richard's former business associates, who had abandoned him during the crisis, now approached him with diversity initiative proposals, which he evaluated with new skepticism about superficial versus meaningful change. Grandma Lula, now receiving quality care for her previously untreated dementia near their home, became a regular part of their weekend routine. Her occasional moments of clarity offered Jasmine precious stories about her mother that might otherwise have been lost in their entryway. A framed $20 bill hung alongside Jasmine's school portrait and her adoption finalization certificate, a tangible reminder of how their journey had begun and all it had overcome. on the anniversary of their first meeting. As Richard helped Jasmine prepare her My Family Story assignment for school, he watched with quiet wonder as she confidently wrote about having two mothers, one who gave her life and one in heaven, watching over her, and a dad who didn't know he was looking for her until she found him. Her essay concluded with words Richard knew would stay with him forever. Some people think families have to match on the outside, but real families match on the inside where the heart is. My daddy says I taught him that love is stronger than rules about who belongs together, and he taught me that promises don't break even when the world gets scary. That's what family really means. As Richard helped Jasmine glue photographs to her presentation board, carefully preserving Letitia's fading image alongside snapshots of their current life, he reflected on how a child's simple wish to buy a daddy had set in motion a journey that transformed not only their two lives but his own understanding of justice, privilege, and family. Jasmine no longer needed to buy belonging with crumpled dollar bills. She had created something far more valuable through her courage and resilience. A father who learned to see the world with new eyes and fight for change beyond their own happy ending. What do you think about Richard and Jasmine's journey? Has their story changed how you think about family, privilege, or the systems designed to protect vulnerable children? Share your thoughts below. What stood out most to you in their transformation? If their story moved you, please like and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge us to see beyond our own experiences. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that families created through love and commitment can be as powerful as those we're born into. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. I'd love to know what other stories you want to hear, stories that explore the complex realities of modern families overcoming barriers that try to keep them apart. Richard and Jasmine's story teaches us that true family transcends blood, race, and circumstances. When a wealthy white store owner and a homeless black child crossed paths, they exposed deep flaws in systems meant to protect the vulnerable. Richard discovered how his privilege had blinded him to the institutional racism that affected Jasmine every day, from unequal schools to biased courts and suspicious neighbors. His transformation from privileged businessman to advocate shows how proximity to injustice can awaken moral courage. Their story reveals how society often values theoretical ideals over children's actual well-being, prioritizing racial matching while ignoring demonstrated love and stability. It challenges us to question who deserves to be family and who decides those boundaries. Through Jasmine's resilience and Richard's commitment, we see how love can overcome systemic barriers, but also how those barriers should never have existed. Their story reminds us that changing one life matters, but changing the system that endangers countless children matters more. Most importantly, they show us that families are built on promises kept during hard times, not on matching appearances. When we define family by commitment rather than convention, we create space for transformative love that heals old wounds and builds stronger futures. Has this story changed how you think about what makes a real family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone facing discrimination or bias in systems meant to protect them, or experienced an unexpected connection that changed your understanding of love and belonging? Share your experiences with our community. If Richard and Jasmine's journey touched your heart, please like to help more people discover their story. Subscribe for more narratives that challenge us to look beyond assumptions and see the world through different eyes. Would you have had the courage to fight the system like Richard, or the resilience Jasmine showed through countless challenges? Tag someone who exemplifies that kind of commitment, and share this video to spark conversations about family, privilege, and justice. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. May it inspire us all to create families defined by love, rather than convention, and to work toward systems that truly protect our most vulnerable.